The story of the Barre Granite industry begins billions of years ago when a swirling mass of gas and liquid hurtled through the cosmos, eventually cooling and solidifying to form the planet Earth. The mountains of New England were among the first formed about 500 million years ago. The weathering of the ages took its toll, wearing down the Green Mountains of Vermont and exposing the granite below. Judged among the finest treasure troves of granite in the world, Barre Granite has a special blend of mica, feldspar, and quartz, the most resistant of the common minerals. The beautiful, fine texture of Barre Granite gives it a uniform grain and enables it to endure centuries of exposure to the elements. However, early farmers, as tillers of the soil, found granite outcroppings nothing more than a nuisance. But those early farmers were also frugal people, and it didn't take them long to realize that the pesky rock might have some use after all. The first practical use for Barre Granite was for millstones. By the time of the War of 1812, settlers were using granite extensively in their homes for underpinning, door stones, and window caps, as well as outdoors for fence posts. Then Robert Parker came on the scene. By all accounts, Robert Parker was the first professional quarryman and the first granite manufacturer. He was also the first person to recognize the economic potential that lay beneath the earth and the first to capitalize on it. Parker formed a partnership with Thomas Courser, and they opened what is believed to have been Barre's first quarry. And in the early 1830s, Finley Wheaton and his son Orrin opened a quarry. In 1834, the Parker Quarry took out the first paid newspaper ad extolling the virtues of their granite. That ad offered what may be considered the granite industry's first guarantee, and the reference to tombstones hinted at the future of the industry. However, the first major contract for the fledgling Barre Granite industry came from the state of Vermont. The state agreed to pay $100 a year for the building stone for the new State House being constructed in neighboring Montpelier. The state furnished the manpower, and Barre furnished the huge pillars, the foundation and underpinning, window caps, sills, cornice, and the walls. Engineer Deacon Jackman, who was hired to drive the teams of horses on the arduous 7-mile trek from Barre to Montpelier, gives the following account. The day's work began early in the morning. Before we had breakfast, the horses were fed and harnessed, ready to hitch to the sleds. We had our breakfast regularly at 5 o'clock, and then we started for the quarries, where we loaded our sleds and returned home to dinner at noon and fed our horses. After dinner, we started for Montpelier with a load of granite, unloaded it, and returned to Barre. After we had supper and our horses were cared for, it would be about 9 o'clock at night. The Vermont State House contract is viewed as a turning point for the Barre Granite industry. In 1840, Finley Wheaton built the first granite house in Barre and furnished granite for the new Congregational Church. 4 years later, Barre Granite from the Wheaton Quarry was used in the county courthouse in Montpelier. The major drawback to the growth of the granite industry at that time was transportation, or more precisely, the lack of it. Hunks of granite were hauled by horses or oxen, and larger pieces were left until winter, when they could be loaded on specially built sleds, and farmers could be hired to haul them. Barre's leaders have always been people with vision. One such person was E.L. Smith, Emery Smith, operator of the Wheaton Quarry. Not willing to sit idly by and complain about problems, in 1871 he became the first to install a permanent derrick. He was also the first to utilize steam drills and the first to use an electric battery in blasting. In addition, the pneumatic plug drill was adopted for use at his quarry. Emery Smith, who was also Barre's first mayor, was bullish on Barre. He said, "Barre Granite is second to none, and when introduced, will recommend itself." It was 1889 when the Barre Granite Manufacturers Association, with Alexander Gordon as its president and William Barclay Sr. as its secretary, was formed. And when the railroad came 1 year later, it triggered a huge explosion of growth in the granite industry. In the decade between 1880 and 1890, Barre's population tripled. Among the first to come to work in Barre in the granite quarries and the plants were the Scots from the granite region near Aberdeen. They were attracted by the promise of better wages and a better life in the New World. About the same time came a large influx of Italian immigrants, many of them young sculptors and stonecutters. Other groups came to Barre from Scandinavia, Spain, England, Ireland, Greece, and French-speaking Canada. For these young and hopeful immigrants, work in the granite industry was both a wonderful opportunity and a hard, sometimes dangerous life. Although early quarrying operations were very primitive, they provided jobs for hundreds of men. The granite blocks had to be virtually twisted and wrestled from the bedrock. Before the advent of compressed air, rough stock was literally hand-cut from the quarries. Several drill holes were cut across the top of the granite using muscle power. The holes were then stuffed with powder, which was ignited to separate the granite block from the quarry. After compressed air was harnessed in the late 1890s, pneumatic plug drills were used to make the holes for the blasting powder. Eventually, channel bar drilling came on the scene, followed many years later by jet piercing, which literally flakes away the granite with a flame of more than 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. There were no derricks in those early days of the Barre Granite industry. The granite blocks were taken from the quarry with the block and tackle method, using skids and rollers to guide the rough stock to the surface and onto the wagons. And good quarrymen in those days were paid up to $2 a day. As the quarries became deeper, wooden derricks made from huge western fir trees were put in place to lift the granite blocks out of the depths and to the surface. Like the early quarrying operations, there were long hours and back-breaking work in the early manufacturing process. The work was done either outdoors or in semicircular sheds. At the sheds, a single derrick boom would move blocks next to the doors where men would roll them inside. It was shortly after the first powered overhead crane was installed when the Barre Granite industry got a big boost with an order for 10 million paving stones for the city of Troy, New York. By the 1890s, about 40 quarries operated in Barre. The chief products were public monuments and cemetery memorials. The marketplace had recognized the remarkable quality, consistency, and durability of Barre gray granite. By 1910, 10 years into the 20th century, the small-scale local industry had mushroomed to dominate Barre's economy. The community was alive with the mingling of foreign languages and diverse cultures. And like industries throughout the United States at the turn of the century, the Barre Granite industry was going through major changes. With a rail link to the outside world and new technologies relieving the back-breaking and inefficient drudgery of quarry work, Barre quickly leapfrogged its way to become the granite center of the world. There have been many benchmarks of progress through the years, including a major breakthrough in 1937 when ventilating equipment was installed in plants throughout Barre and the dreaded white lung disease, silicosis, was effectively eliminated. Another benchmark of progress occurred in the 1930s when 10 granite companies merged to form what is today the largest monumental quarrying and manufacturing firm in the United States, the Rock of Ages Corporation. Barre granite manufacturers' skills are regarded among the finest in the world, and manufacturers are continually looking for ways to have the competitive edge. Computer-driven saws cut through stone at the rate of a foot an hour. The automated diamond-tipped saws and the multi-headed polishers accomplish in minutes or a few hours what took days to do by hand. Superheated tongues of flame easily cut through quarry stone that once resisted strong men armed with steel pins and sledgehammers. 100-ton cranes do the lifting instead of men and teams of horses. Over the years, Barre Granite has been quarried and beautifully shaped into monuments to honor the memory of presidents, religious figures, mighty industrialists, world-famous performers, star athletes, and millions of people across our nation. The work of Barre artisans can also be seen in the buildings that form America's skylines. The organization that has supported the Barre Granite industry, the Barre Granite Association, has reached its 100th anniversary. At its centennial, more than 60 member firms comprise the BGA, ranging from full-service manufacturing companies to firms producing custom drafting, sawing, steeling, sandblasting, polishing, and sculpting. They also supply materials, transportation, and other services to BGA manufacturers. These companies are proud to continue the traditions of quality, innovation, and hard work for which Barre has been known since the early 1800s. The manufacturers of the Barre Granite Association are good companies to do business with, building on a great past and looking forward with great anticipation for our industry in the 21st century.